Today's video is the second in my three-part colour pencil portrait series. Today we're going to be drawing the hair and the clothing. Let's get to it. So today's video is part 2 where we're drawing the hair and the clothing. If you would like to see how I drew the background and transferred the image onto the paper, that was the last video. I will leave a link up above for you. Now, if I was doing a pet portrait, I'd be starting off on the eyes and working my way outwards. Because this is a person and it's long hair and I don't like drawing long hair and I don't like drawing clothing, I'm starting with that first. Now, there's two reasons for this. First of all is because I don't want to rush them at the end after I've spent a while on the face and ruin my portrait that way. So if I do it first, I make sure I'm putting as much detail as I need to into those areas that I'm not as happy about drawing. Second is that then I can see my values when it comes to the face that bit better. If I did the face first and I came on to do the hair, then I might have to go through a bit more than doing it the other way around with changing my values in my face and making sure that the darks are dark enough, because I'm not then fighting against the white of the paper as much. So that's why I do it the way around I'm doing it now. All it is a building up layer process as always. Hair grows in clumps and sections, so rather than trying to draw every single individual strand, make sure you're working in those sections. So really study your reference photo and see where those clumps are sitting and how they're sitting and how they interact with each other. And then slowly build up your colour. I like to add the lights and then some darks, and then I do the mid-tones is how I work with this. And I just keep on building. So I put enough colour down and then I'll go through with my blender and wait for that to dry and then keep on building up those layers until it starts to look as I want it to look. Only in the very final layers am I adding any sort of individual hair, and that's only a few here and there to look like the flyaways that you need to make the hair look realistic. If you just leave it in the separate clumps and clusters, it's not going to look as realistic because it'll look far too neat, and hair isn't that neat. Even if you've straightened it and styled it, you're still going to have a few flyaway wispy hairs. So adding them in at the very, very last step is the best way to make it look that extra bit realistic. As you can see, I'm going back up in there. I added the ear. I've only added the ear and the neck in this one because the hair is sitting over it, so I needed them in there. So I added the ear first and then put the hair on top of that. Now, the footage I had for the hair alone was about 7 hours. So to do the hair was at least 7 hours. It takes a lot of time, and this is incredibly sped up. If you want to see more of the clothing, I'll put a link at the timing for the clothing part in the description for you. I would tell you what colours I'm using for the hair, but the answer is quite literally all of them. I am using all of the browns and some beiges and a cream as well. Hair isn't just one colour, it's got an awful lot of other colours running through it, from cool tones to warm tones, and I am just building them up as they go. At the top I made it look a bit more ashy. I used a purple brown in amongst some more golden browns, the purple neutralising that golden colour, and that gave me a bit more of an ashy tone at the top. And as the hair comes down past her ear and down to the shoulders, it's a bit more of a golden brown, dirty blonde colour. So I'm adding more of the golden browns throughout. To add my flyaways, I'm using just a cream coloured pencil and adding those extra flyaway bits and the extra highlights that's needed. Now on this side, I hadn't got my camera angled properly, so you missed the very bottom of it, but I'll be doing the same steps on the other side, and the other side I zoomed out and so didn't miss the bottom part. I got carried away with drawing, I'm afraid, and so missed the bit that was kind of important at the bottom. But as I say, I'll do the same steps on the other side, so you'll see exactly what it was that I had done. So I'm just building up my lights and my darks, adding some mid-tones and then blending, waiting for that to dry and then adding that colour back on top again, and I keep going until it's looking how I want it to look. And as you can see, I keep going back over to the ear because as I add more depth and colour to the hair, the ear was looking too light. So I had to go in and add more saturation to that as well. I was experimenting a bit as well while I was doing the hair on this portrait. Normally, because I blend with the odourless mineral spirits, low odour spirits, because I normally use them, I don't normally use a scraper tool or a knife to lift up highlights, but I wanted to see on this if I could get any sort of highlight because of the amount of layers I'd put on top of the pencil after the OMS. I wanted to see if that would work for me, and it did to a certain degree. I think I did get better results with my Luminance white and cream pencils, but they did add some highlights for me. It's a good technique to use if you're using the burnishing technique to lift up the extra strands. If you use a scraper knife or a X-Acto knife, just be very careful and practice before you touch your piece with it, because you don't want to be cutting your paper. But that's a very good way of adding the extra highlights and extra wispy bits if you're using the burnishing technique. As I say, with this technique where I'm blending with the paint thinner, it worked to a degree, but not as much as it would have done otherwise. That technique tends to work better when you've got a lighter layer underneath and then you've put the darker colours on top and then you scrape away to that lighter colour again. But because I blended, there wasn't that much of a lighter colour underneath to begin with. So I think that's where my problem was with that. But art is experimenting, so now I know, and I probably won't be doing it again with the OMS. Not a problem. So on to the other side now. Again, paying attention to where my clumps and clusters of the hair are sitting and where the darks are. It's darker towards the roots, and then there's a bit of a shine where the light hits it, and then darker again towards the ear. So putting in those base colours, then over with the blender, and then building up again all of those tones. I'd say it takes a long time. It's lots and lots of layers. Don't be fooled into thinking it's a quick process. This is incredibly sped up. As I say, I've put sort of 7-8 hours work on this hair into just over 10 minutes of the video, because the other part of the video is the clothing. So it is incredibly sped up. Take your time. Some people work faster than others. As long as you're paying attention to your lights and darks and your reference photo, then it doesn't matter how long you take, as long as you're getting the result that you want in the end. Now, in order to make sure that this doesn't look like it's as stuck on as it could do, and make sure that I haven't got the halo of the light, the edge of where I'd masked off, I want to make sure that some of that pencil is going slightly over that line. I've got some of the wispy hairs that I'm adding, not many, but the few that I am adding, going over that paint for the background, just to make sure that everything's flowing together and it all looks cohesive, because you don't want like a halo of white around the edge of your picture, because it won't look right. If you do like what I did, that was good grammar for you. If you do like I did and missed a bit that you'd masked off, and you'd masked off too much, I realised that a bit of where I had my hair was actually supposed to be background. So I've just gone through the colour pencils and matched that as best I can. Only light layers though, because I am going to be going over it with the hair. But I realised that was supposed to be more of a wispy area of hair, not a clump of hair, and that it wouldn't sit and look right. So I made sure to fill that in before I added the hair. So it's not the end of the world if you have done that, but just make sure you do notice and that you work to fix it. Now here we are at the bottom where I'd missed last time. Again, working in those clumps and clusters. I'm using sort of all the browns still, but mainly the sort of more goldy ones, and then going through with my darks, just plotting out where those lights and darks are and where those strands of hair need to be. Now my daughter's hair is quite straggly. She is a little scruff bag. She's got naturally very wavy, unruly, wild hair, and trying to capture that and not look like it was scribbly was a challenge for me. but it was all about just layering and keep on layering. Even now, at the end of this video, I haven't necessarily completely finished the clothes or the hair. I'm going to be getting the face in, and then I will do the final touches of everything I need to add to make sure it's all cohesive and looks right, and all the lights and darks are where they need to be and as dark as they need to be. So just because I've finished a section doesn't mean it's completely finished. You'll see in a moment when I start adding more of the clothing to the background on the left hand side, it doesn't look as dark as it does now, because as soon as you put those darks in somewhere else, it lighten everything else up and you'll realize where you need to change your values. So again, just trying to make the hair cohesive and add in the jumper colour in between those strands as well. I'd say there's a difference between making it look windswept and a bit out of place like it is, and then making it look like a complete straggly, zombified mess. So desperately trying to go somewhere between the two there on this portrait. As I say, she didn't have the easiest hair to do, and as I don't like drawing long hair at the best of times, it probably wasn't the best portrait to do. Having said that, yes, it probably was, because I learned an awful lot, and next time I won't be as nervous about doing the long hair. So I'd gone back through then with that scraper tool once again, because I didn't learn enough the first time. I had to try it again on the second half, because I don't make the same mistake once. I make it a few times just to make sure. Okay, so the next day now, I left that overnight because I'd called it a day. It was getting late, and I've managed to change the angle now. You can see a bit better what I'm doing. And I'm just starting to block in the top of her jumper. Now she's sort of wearing a machine knitted jumper. It's very faded. It's sort of like a black grey colour now. As you can see, I'm not using black or grey particularly right now. I'm starting off with blue because I don't want it to look flat. I will be using a lot of blacks and greys over this, but I don't like to use black just on its own because I find it doesn't give it enough depth and dimension. It makes it look quite flat. So I start off with a blue or a purple or a red or something like that, generally when I'm using blacks, and then darken it and darken it and darken it to get the look that I'm going for. I'm just putting the top of this jumper now so that I can get again in between the strands of hair at the very bottom, and I could see where I was going with the hair, and you can see already adding that darker colour has already made the hair look lighter than it did initially. So I'm going back through now and tweaking bits and adding strands of hair that I'd missed out, and darkening up sections that need darkening. As with all art and any art piece you're working on, just because you think you've finished a section, you haven't until you finish the whole picture. Don't think just because you've called an area done and moved on to another bit that you can't go back in and correct your values and correct certain areas. I do it all the time. I move on to another area and then go back in to readjust the area that I was working on before, because you can see better. As soon as you've stopped fighting against the white of the paper, you can see better the values and the colours that you should be going for. Because everything looks really quite dark when it's against the stark white of the paper. And then as soon as you cover that up with another colour, you realise the colours aren't quite where you thought they were initially, because that white is very deceiving. So again, on this side now, just blocking in the top, adding some of the lights and darks to the top, and then going back in now on the other side, back to the hair. I say literally to and fro I go when I'm doing any sort of drawing. I'm just tweaking at the hair now. Also note with your hair, when you are drawing hair, that it's not straight. Even straight hair isn't straight. There are curves to it and curls to it. Make sure you're following them, otherwise you're not going to look very natural. Now on to the t-shirt. The t-shirt she's wearing underneath her jumper is sort of a mottled green sort of colour, so I've emulated that as best I can with warm greys and an olive green and some dark greys and whites, just working horizontally to try and get that, and then adding a dark grey shadow where the V of the jumper is just sitting over it. I'll go back in and enhance that more as I go along. I'm just blocking in colours at the moment to make sure everything's sat where it should be. Now this is the bit that's a bit more time consuming. I am now onto the jumper. I'm onto the bottom half of the jumper, and it doesn't have stripes, but it's got a ribbed pattern to it. And trying to emulate the ribbed pattern was quite frustrating. To begin with, it was looking very cartoony, as you can see now. As always, keep on going. It goes through really ugly stages like now. As you can see, that looks like nothing on earth, but I will keep on layering and keep on going until it looks somewhat how I want it to look. So again, with the rib at the side, just adding my darks in there and adding some shadows. And again, as I've added those shadows, I noticed in the hair it was looking lighter, so I work on everything as I go. While the blender is drying on that top rib there, I'm back down to the bottom of this jumper and darkening it up now with the black, and I'm adding where the shadows are to make sure that the top has some dimension to it. It needs darks and lights so that it looks like the fabric is folding and moving the way that it's supposed to. Also making sure I've got the highlights I need on the button. I will probably go through a bit later and add some really bright highlights to that with some touch-up texture and titanium white powder by brush and pencil. I'll do that a bit later on if I need to. So I'm using light greys and black and a bit of pink now to try and get the colours in the bottom of the rib right. I'm using the light greys to add a bit more of the texture because this is a worn jumper. It's not new, it's starting to grey, it's been washed a million times, and so I'm trying to show that in this drawing. So just working with a fairly light hand. Obviously I want the colours that I'm using to show up, but I don't want to press so hard that I can't add any more layers, so I work as light as I can do and then blend and then work on top of that and then blend. So somewhat happy with that left hand side now, so moving on and emulating it on the right hand side. So once again I'm putting those darker lines in first. Notice I've tried to pay attention with those lines as to how they're gathering together with the folds and the ripples of the fabric. If they all went straight down, there'd be no form to this piece at all, and it would look a bit odd. So always pay attention where the folds and where the movement in your fabric is. That will dictate the way that lines go. It will dictate where you put your shadows and your highlights as well. So once I've got all those blocked in and the colour in between added, I've blended that out, and then I'm going back through with some more detail, darkening up those shadows, going over it with some greys. I've gone horizontally with the greys to try and give it a bit more of a fabric look to it, and then blending out again, and then just adding in where the wear and tear is with my light greys. So just fussing with it to make it look how it needs to, and then adding in pieces of hair where I need to add them as well, because I'd missed some of the strands that I needed to because I couldn't put them in until the darks were in. So I've just added those in now, and now I can go in and do the ribbing on the right side. So again, I've used dark grey and a black to add the details of the rib, and then gone over that with a grey to start building up the shadows. Being careful around that button. And I'm trying with very sharp pencils, it's very small, to try and add the lights and the darks and the shadows to that button. It's important to put as much time and effort into the little things as you do into the big things, like say the ears and the clothing, as much into them as you do in the face, because otherwise it will show in your final picture that you've rushed certain areas and it will detract from the piece. So just pay attention to how much effort you're making on each bit. I'm just finishing this off now by just adding some more shadows into the neck just to make sure that everything's sat where it should be. And here's the piece so far. Next week we'll be working on the face and adding the final little tweaks here and there to complete the portrait. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please leave me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon. That way you'll be notified of any new content that I post. For now though, bye guys.